Episode 1: A Social Outcast. Charles Miles Manson was born no-name Maddox on the 11th or 12th of November 1934. His mother could not recall which date, so she chose the 11th. Kathleen Maddox was just 16 and had run away from her home in Ashland, Kentucky because of the repressive Bible-thumping behavior of her mother. Manson's father was a drugstore cowboy who called himself Colonel Scott. He didn't stick around long enough to see the birth. It was William Manson, to whom Kathleen was married for a brief time, who gave the boy his name. Kathleen Maddox found it difficult to cope with motherhood so young, and Manson was regularly abandoned. When he was 6, Manson was left with his grandparents while his mother and her brother Luther robbed a gas station. They were caught and jailed for 5 years. Manson went to live with his strict grandparents for a few weeks, and then his mother's sister Joan. A year later, Kathleen would return for Manson, and the boy was ecstatic. They began a nomadic life together, but Manson could never be sure whether he'd be with his mother or pawned off onto someone else. Manson and his mother moved around Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana. They lived a haphazard existence that verged on the edge of crime, until Kathleen met a man who wanted her, but not her son. She arranged for her son to be made a ward of court, and Manson was sent to the Gabalt Home for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. Although his mother visited him there and promised that pretty soon he would be back with her, it never happened. From then on, Manson's life is a sad tale of boys' homes and reformatories running away, stealing cars and food, and trying to endure the sadism meted out in some of these establishments. He became increasingly hurt, bitter, and angry. He also picked up some useful survival tricks on the way to ensure that nobody messed with him. After the age of 16, he spent his time in reformatories, which were apparently an improvement on the homes and a great way to learn the ins and outs of petty crime. In May 1954, Manson was paroled and placed into the care of his aunt and uncle. He went to live with them, and that is where he met a miner's daughter, Rosalie Jean Willis, and married her in January 1954. Manson tried to go straight, but was soon seduced back into a life of crime by an older man who asked him to steal a car and drive it back down to California. The deal backfired, and for a while afterwards, Manson wobbled along the thin line between crime and hustling. The car thefts would soon catch up with him, and he was jailed for 5 years. He was sent to Terminal Island in San Pedro. Soon afterwards, his son was born. Then Rosalie divorced him and went out of his life, taking little Charlie with her. Manson devoted himself to learning how to pimp so that he would have a career when he got out. In 1958, he was released to Hollywood. Soon, he was arrested again for taking girls across the state line and trying to pass a stolen check worth $38. Manson ran to Mexico, but the police caught him, and this time probation was turned into a 10-year stretch at McNeil Island Penitentiary and Terminal Island Penitentiary. He next saw the outside world in the spring of 1967. When Charles Manson, small-time hood and petty criminal, walked out of Terminal Island Penitentiary on the 21st of March 1967, he was 32 years old, and everything had changed. The restrained, conservative world he had left behind when he started his prison sentence had been replaced by the new generation of love and peace and doing your own thing. Tuning in, turning on, dropping out were the new catchphrases. Incoming inmates had told tales of what was going on outside the prison walls, but Manson did not believe them. Now he did. Pretty young girls were running around every place with no panties or bras on and asking for love. Cannabis and LSD were being handed out in the streets like candy. It was a different world than I'd ever been used to, and one I believed was too good for me, he said. It was a convict's dream, and after being locked up for 7 solid years, I didn't run from it. I joined it, and a generation that lived it. Manson came out from Terminal Island with just $30 in his pocket and his guitar in his hand. All of young America was on the move, and they were all going where he was going, San Francisco. Everywhere people were rebelling against authority, dropping out of college courses, refusing to toe the straight line, mocking the establishment, trying to establish a counterculture. For the first time in his life, Charles Manson, the institutionalized reject, was in step with the rest of the world. His disaffected view of society was welcomely approved and endorsed. Manson described that period. And we slept in the park, and we loved on the streets, and my hair got a little longer, and I started playing music, and people liked my music, and people smiled at me, and people put their arms around me and hugged me. I didn't know how to act. It just took me away. A little over 2 years after being released from prison, Charles Manson and his family were living a primitive commune life on the edge of the desert. They were based at the Old Spa movie ranch near Chatsworth, often retreating to the more desolate and inaccessible Barker Ranch in Panamint Valley. They were a fluctuating population, but there was always around 30 or 35 of them. 3/4 of them were women, and a few of them were children. What the press would come to call the Manson Family started out unspectacularly. Manson, with his guitar and fashionably long hair, quickly became a regular in the hippie scene in San Francisco. He would hang out, smoke marijuana, busk with his guitar. That was what he was doing when he met Mary Brunner, a librarian, a slim, flat-chested redhead. She was not pretty, but definitely Manson's type, and he moved in with her. A few weeks later, he acquired a VW minibus, and he and Mary took off, travelling up and down the West Coast. Manson went to LA, trying to set up his career as a rock superstar. On Venice Beach, he met Lynette Frum, a slim red-haired girl who had just had a confrontation with her father. Manson brought her back to Mary, and the nucleus of the family was formed. In September, they were joined by disaffected legal clerk Patricia Krenwinkel. Manson was establishing a harem. He and his busload of girls, all 10 years or more younger than him, were invited to all the best parties. His method of domination was acid and sex. Half a lifetime ago, Charles Manson had been married and had fathered a son. While he was in prison, his wife had divorced him and taken their son with her. In the 1950s, Manson had for a short period been an unsuccessful pimp, falling in love with his main girl, who had dumped him. With Mary and another girl called Darlene, whom he had picked up, he discovered something new. By sleeping with both girls on a rota basis, Manson called the tune, controlled the situation. He learned to wield the power of sex. Later on, when there were more family members, Manson would be the one to choreograph their orgies, arranging the bodies artistically, directing who should be where and do what to whom. Every woman who would join the family was initiated by Manson, first with a tab of LSD and then with a few hours of sex. When university dropout Bruce Davis joined them, the VW needed to be replaced, so Manson traded it in for an old school bus. They painted it black and wrote Hollywood Film Productions on the side to avoid trouble from the police. The black bus became famous in the vicinity. Manson and his group moved around in all the fashionable places in the town, with Manson trying to establish himself on the fringes of the movie and music world. More would join them. Susie Atkins, Ruth Ann Morehouse, the preacher's daughter, who married a hapless bus driver in order to leave home and join the family. Red-haired Diane Lake, whose parents had dropped out to join the hog farm commune. Bobby Beausoleil, the pretty boy actor and musician who had starred in Kenneth Anger's underground film Lucifer Rising. Through Bobby, Manson was to meet Kitty Lutzinger, Kathy Scher, Leslie Van Houten, and Gary Hinman, among others. Charles Watson, the All-American ex-athlete, met the family through Beach Boy Dennis Wilson. Wilson was so fascinated by their lifestyle that he allowed them to freeload on him unmercifully. He housed them, fed them, and supplied them all with clothes from his own wardrobe. By mid-1968, Manson had most of his family. There were 3 girls to every boy. The size of the family had grown so rapidly that the bus could no longer cope, and they had started living in and around Topanga Canyon in various shacks. It's impossible to document every person wandering the West Coast who blundered into the Manson circle and out again, but the people listed above formed the permanent family. They were joined by Brooks Poston, T.J. Wallerman, Steve Grogan, Juan Flynn, Nancy Pittman, Kathy Gillis, Sandra Good, and Joan Wilderbush. The family wasn't made up of obvious misfits and social outcasts, although they may have become so. Manson did not surround himself with people like himself, paranoid petty crooks. The majority of the family members were easily led and impressionable young people. Many were middle-class white girls, librarians, clerks, students, university graduates, or teachers. They provided easy guru fodder for Manson. Only Susan Atkins had a criminal record. The material possessions various family members brought with them, cars, access to property, substantial amounts of money, daddy's credit cards, allowed the family to carry on. Through an associate of San Diego socialite Sandra Good, the family gained access to the Spahn movie ranch and began to live there. They fed themselves from perfectly good food that was thrown away by supermarkets every night, helping out on the ranch, hustling dope, stealing or borrowing credit cards and cars. Through Kathy Gillis, they acquired the Barker Ranch, handing over one of Dennis Wilson's gold records to its bemused old owner as rent. In the desert, Manson ruled supreme. Some family members found the isolation, Manson's increasing paranoia and menacing presence of the Straight Satan's biker gang too much, and left, or rather escaped. However, Manson's earliest adherents proved his most devoted. They would do anything he wanted, or they thought he wanted. They were ready to kill without mercy or remorse. On the 27th of July 1969, Gary Hinman, a 34-year-old music teacher, became the first victim of the Manson family. 3 family members, Bobby Busalil, Mary Brunner, and Sadie Mae Glutz, had been sent round to his house to collect some money that was owed. They knew he had it. He ran a very profitable illegal drugs operation, and the rumour was that he had just inherited $20,000 and hidden it in his house on the old Topanga Canyon Road, Los Angeles. The 3 visitors argued with Hinman for 2 hours. Finally, Bobby Busalil lost patience and pulled a gun, a 9mm Radom pistol. He handed it over to Sadie while he went to search the house. At that moment, Gary tried to escape and began struggling with Sadie. The gun went off, and the bullet ricocheted around the kitchen, embedding itself under the sink. Bobby ran back into the room, grabbed the gun and hit Gary around the head with it. They telephoned Charles Manson, who came to the house himself with Bruce Davis. Manson took a sword, which he used to cut Hinman's ear, leaving a 5-inch wound. He told Busalil to find out where the money was and then bring Hinman out to the ranch. He instructed the 2 girls to clean up the mess. Bobby, Mary and Sadie Mae tied Gary up and left him on the hearth rug whilst they ransacked the house. Mary Brunner stitched up Hinman's cuts with dental floss and wrapped his wounds in bandages and gave him something to drink. All they managed to get out of him were pink slips signing his 2 cars over to them. At dawn, Hinman ran for the window and began to scream for help. Bobby panicked and seized the knife, stabbing Hinman twice through the chest, leaving him to bleed to death. The 3 of them wiped away all their fingerprints except for one and bundled up incriminating blood-stained clothes and bandages. Somebody stuck a finger in Gary Hinman's blood and scrawled the word "Political Piggy" on the wall above his head. Another daubed a crude version of a cat's paw, the sign of the militant Black Panthers. They had locked all of the doors and were on their way out via the side window when they decided to climb back in and smother Hinman. Hot-wiring Hinman's VW minibus, they all drove home to the Spahn Ranch, stopping off on the way at Topanga Kitchen for coffee and cherry cake. 3 weeks later, on midnight of the 8th of August, a white and yellow Ford moved slowly down Cielo Drive, Hollywood, stopping opposite 10050, the home of actress Sharon Tate. Tex Watson had been there before, while Linda Kasabian, Katie, and Sadie Mae Glutz watched. Tex shinned up a telegraph pole and cut the wires linking 10050 with the outside world. Tex, Linda, Katie, and Sadie Mae climbed over the security fence, clutching their bundles of spare clothes and their double-edged knives. Tex carried the family gun, a .22 buntline special, and 43 feet of 3-ply white nylon rope snaked around his shoulder. The house lay wide open. A white 2-seater Nash Ambassador came down the drive on the way out. Brandishing the gun, Tex leapt into the headlight beams, screaming for the driver to stop. He thrust the gun into the car window and shot 18-year-old Stephen Parent 4 times in the chest and pushed the car into the bushes. Tex then sent Linda, Katie and Sadie Mae to scout around the house, but they found no way in, so he began cutting his way through the screens of the empty room at the front. Linda stayed outside keeping watch and never entered the house. 3 walked in and saw Wojtek Frykowski lying stretched out on a large couch. Frykowski woke to find the buntline thrust in his face. Tex, Katie and Sadie Mae surrounded him. When he asked what they wanted, Tex replied, "I'm the devil. I'm here to do the devil's business. Give me your money." Sadie Mae went and found a towel to tie up Frykowski's hands. Then she wandered around the rest of the house. As she did this, she found Abigail Folger lying reading on her bed. Sadie walked past and stood in the doorway of another bedroom, watching Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, talking to Jay Sebring. Sadie reported back to Tex, who sent her back to get them. Jay Sebring, an ex-Navy man, demanded that Sharon be allowed to sit down, and then he made a lunge for the gun. Tex shot Sebring through the armpit. When Tex demanded money, his victims were eager to give it up. While Frykowski lay tied up on the couch, Tex yoked Abigail Folger and Sharon Tate to the unconscious Jay Sebring, pulled the nooses tight and threw the rope end over the wooden beam that ran across the living room. Sadie Mae hung onto it. Tex then told Sadie to kill Frykowski. He went down fighting. As she raised her double-edged knife, he finally wrenched his hands free, reached up, pulled her by the hair and banged her head. She lashed out with the knife, stabbing him in the legs 4 times and then in the back twice. Somehow during the struggle, she lost the knife, so she clung onto her victim's back and yelled. Tex shot Frykowski twice, but he continued to fight back. Panic gripped Tex and he began beating Frykowski around the face with the gun butt so hard that the walnut handle grip shattered. The sight of Frykowski's last stand galvanized the other victims, who began to struggle for their lives. Abigail Folger, as yet unharmed, broke free and ran for the door. Katie followed her. Tex moved in on the wounded and struggling Sebring, stabbing him 4 times. Then he joined Katie. Tex had now given way to uncontrollable bloodlust. Thrusting Katie out of the way, he fell upon Abigail, cutting her neck and stabbing her several times. Meanwhile, the seemingly indestructible Frykowski had staggered out of the front door, screaming for help. Outraged at this, Tex rushed after him, stabbing him again and again. Wojtek Frykowski was found to have 51 stab wounds in total after his death. Abigail Folger somehow got to her feet and blundered towards the French doors to the pool. Katie chased after her, leaving a print of her little finger on the blood-smeared doorframe. Abigail got out, staggered across the grass, falling just before she reached the fence. Inside the house, Sharon Tate, unguarded, unharmed as yet, but tied to a dead man, tried to make her escape. Katie came back in and caught her. She pleaded for her life and for the life of her unborn baby. Sadie Mae's response was brutal. Sadie Mae and Katie held her down while Tex stabbed her to death. Then they all stabbed her. Tex ordered the girls to leave, and whilst they were out of the house, he went on a final rampage, stabbing and kicking at the lifeless bodies and linking up Jay Sebring and Sharon Tate with twin nooses. Then Sadie dipped the towel used to tie Frykowski in Sharon Tate's blood and inscribed the words "pig" on the front hall wall. She left, leaving the front door wide open and 2 bloody footprints on the porch. Tex, Linda, Sadie and Katie returned to Spahn Ranch, hurling their blood-stained clothes and knives away at random on the way. Later that night, Charles Manson and another family member came to clean up and look for Sadie's knife. They wiped Stephen Parent's car clean and then got rid of fingerprints with the towel that had tied up Frykowski. They left it over Jay Sebring's face. By dawn, everyone was tucked up in somebody's sleeping bag back at the ranch. Tex, Linda, Sadie and Katie slept all day. The next night, at an hour after midnight, the yellow and white Ford pulled up outside 3301 Waverly Drive in the Los Feliz district of Los Angeles. Inside were Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Linda Kasabian, Sadie Mae Glutz, Katie, and 2 new faces, Leslie Von Houten and Clem Grogan. Manson took his sword and gun and got out of the car with Tex following. They walked up the drive to the long, low white house and found a way in. In the living room, they would find Lino LaBianca in his pajamas. "Be calm, sit down and be quiet," ordered Manson. Tex stood over Lino LaBianca while Manson took the gun into Rosemary LaBianca's bedroom and brought her back, tying them up using the 2 leather thongs Manson wore around his neck. Manson wanted money and the couple gave him their wallets. Lino LaBianca, a supermarket millionaire, offered to take Manson to the store for more. The offer was turned down and Manson walked out of the front door. The LaBiancas braved again, but not for long. Clutching their bundles of spare clothes and bayonets, Katie and Leslie entered the house. They went straight to the kitchen, pulled down the kitchen blinds and took out a carving fork and serrated wooden-handled knife. Then they forced Rosemary LaBianca to lay face down on her bed, covered her head in a pillowcase and loosely noosed her with the flex of the bedside lamp. With equal efficiency, Tex pulled up Lino LaBianca's pajama top and stabbed him 4 times in the throat with the kitchen knife, leaving it in the last wound. Then, using his own knife, he stabbed him 8 more times in the stomach. Lino LaBianca bled to death, helped on his way by a pillow that Tex had put over his face. Leslie held Rosemary LaBianca while Katie stabbed her. She tried to crawl away, pulling the lamp with her. Hearing the noise, Tex rushed in. He helped Katie stab Rosemary LaBianca 41 times. Tex and Katie wanted Leslie to have a turn, but she was reluctant. When she finally did begin, it was too late. Mrs. LaBianca was already dead, but she still stabbed her 16 more times in the buttocks. With the knife, Tex carved the word war on Lino LaBianca's abdomen. Katie perforated the bodies with a carving fork, finally leaving it buried in Mr. LaBianca's stomach. They tied lamp flecks around his neck and put a pillowcase over his head. Using Mrs. LaBianca's blood, somebody used their finger to scrawl, "Death to the pigs," on the wall. With a rolled-up sheet of paper dipped in the same blood, somebody printed "Rise" over a painting in the living room, and finally Katie wrote "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator. Gary Hinman and the Tate and LaBianca victims were all killed within a fortnight of each other. In each of these murders, they appeared to be motiveless. All died in a particularly bloody manner, and their blood was used to inscribe words on the walls. The police soon realized the words all had the same connecting themes, and yet, at the beginning, they made no connection between them. Gary Hinman's body was found by friends on the 31st of July 1969, 4 days after he'd been murdered. They called the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which deals with crimes outside the metropolitan area. Sergeant Paul Whiteley and Deputy Charles Gunther were assigned to the case, and it was to be their persistence which finally cracked the whole family affair. One of Hinman's killers, Bobby Bosolel, was picked up very quickly on the 6th of August. When Whiteley and Gunther read police reports on the Tate LaBianca killings, they were intrigued. They knew Bobby could not have been involved with them because he was in custody, but they wondered about the bloody scrawlings of the words "pig" and "death to pigs" on Hinman's wall. They suspected Bobby had not been alone in the Hinman killing. He hung out with a weird bunch of hippies who lived at the Spahn movie ranch led by Charles Manson. Perhaps whoever had been with Bobby had gone on to do the Tate LaBianca murders. Whiteley passed on his ideas to Sergeant Jesse Buckles, an officer on the Tate investigations team in the Los Angeles Police Department. Buckles dismissed the idea as a non-starter and didn't even bother to follow up the report or send it to his superior officers. It took weeks for either team to get anywhere. The Tate investigation looked promising at first. The grisly scene had been discovered by the live-out housekeeper, Mrs. Winifred Chapman. There was one person alive and unharmed on the Tate property residence, William Garrettson, the young caretaker who lived in the guest house in the back garden and claimed he had not heard anything. He was dazed, confused, frightened, but above all, he had been in the grounds of the residence when the murders took place. They leant on him, but could prove nothing. The next day, when the LaBianca killings broke, all police could say definitely was that Garrettson had not done it. He was in custody. In uptown LA, panic swept across the poolsides. Gun sales shot up, security dog handlers had never had it so good, and social life ceased. The pressure was on the police to be seen to act. In the Tate murder case, the most promising lead seemed to be the drugs. A terrified Polish friend told the police that Wojtek Frakowski was being set up as a drug dealer. The LAPD were well aware that Jay Sebring, a hairdresser stars, was involved in drug scene, discreetly supplying the rich and famous. In contrast, the LaBiancas were eminently respectable, successful, rich and contented. Lino LaBianca was a supermarket supremo, and Mrs. LaBianca had her own retail business. Without much conviction, the police explored the idea of some sort of mafia connection or a gambling vendetta. They knew that Lino LaBianca had been a keen gambler and a racehorse owner, but there were no convincing leads. It wasn't until the 15th of October that one of the LaBianca team thought about checking out similar murders on the LASO patch and found out about the Hinman case. Unlike the Tate detectives, they considered it an important lead, but as they were gearing up, news came in from Whiteley and Gunther about the activities of the desert hippies. All had not been quiet on the Spartan Ranch. On the 16th of August, it had been raided by the LASO officers in pursuit of stolen cars and credit cards. 2 months later, on the 12th of October, Inyo County Police raided the remote Barker Ranch in the pursuit of car thieves, arsonists, and illegal firearms. This time, they arrested 24 family members, including the scruffy guru himself. The remoteness of the ranch meant that the raid took 3 days. During this time, 2 frightened young women stumbled out of a dry gully and begged the police for protection. They were Kitty Lutzinger, who was 5 months pregnant at the time with Bobby Boselow's child, and Stephanie Schramm, who was Charles Manson's latest love. They'd been trying to escape. Inyo County Police informed LASO of the raid, and Whiteley and Gunther, who had been looking for Lutzinger for months in connection with the Hinman case, drove the 200-odd miles up to Independence to interview her. Kitty had devastating news. She had heard that Manson had told Bobby and Sadie Mae to go and collect money from Hinman. She had also heard Sadie Mae talk to the other family members at the ranch about stabbing a man in the legs and him pulling her hair. Sadie Mae, alias Susan Atkins, was also locked up at Independence. When interviewed, she told them she was at Hinman's house when Bobby murdered him. She was booked on suspicion of murder and eventually detained in the Sybil Brand Institute in Los Angeles. The LaBianca detectives, although not too impressed by the Hinman connection, nevertheless set their formidable intelligence gathering machine in motion, pursuing information on anyone who had anything to do with Manson and his followers. Something Kitty had said about Sadie stuck in the minds of Whiteley and Gunther. Hinman had not been stabbed in the legs. Wojtek Frykowski had. Could Sadie have been talking about the Tate murders? Whiteley thought the Tate detectives should know, and so he told them. But to their shame, they did nothing at all about it for 11 days. Kitty Lutzinger was not interviewed until the 31st of October. A direct link between the Manson family and all 3 murders was becoming visible. Sadie Mae, who loved to talk, had begun talking in jail to her cellmate Ronnie Howard and her workmate Virginia Graham. It took them some time to decide she was not making it up, and even longer to find someone who would listen to them. The LaBianca conscientiousness paid off, netting Al Springer and then Danny DiCarlo of the Straight Satans, who had lots to say by the way of hearsay and circumstantial evidence. People outside the Manson family, such as record producer Terry Melcher and Greg Jacobson, gave evidence that Manson had been at the Tate residence. On the 5th of December, Susan Atkins took to the stand to testify to the grand jury and describe what really happened on the night of the 8th of August at 10050 Cielo Drive. In her testimony, she stated that herself, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian had driven to the house under the orders of Manson. She stated he told them to wear dark clothes, bring knives, and to follow Tex's lead. She said that they arrived around midnight and that Tex had cut the phone lines and climbed a fence. The group had then entered the house through a window. She recounted how they'd found Wojciech Frykowski on the couch, and how Tex had said to him, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business." She detailed how the victims, Frykowski, Folger, Sebring and Tate, were all rounding up in the living room, and then Tex had shot Sebring when he protested, how rope was tied around the victims' necks and thrown over beams, and how they pleaded for their lives, and how Tex had told them they were all going to die. She described the chaos that ensued when Frykowski fought back, and Folger had fled outside, when they were chased down and stabbed. She told the court how she'd held Tate down, and how Tate had begged her, "Please let me go, all I want to do is have my baby," and how she told her, "Woman, I have no mercy for you." She claimed Tex had then stabbed Tate in the chest. She also told of how she'd touched Tate's bloody chest and reflected on the living being that was still inside her. That after all of this, Tex had told her to write something on the door, so finally she picked up a bloody towel and wrote the word "Ig" on the door. The Manson trial began on the 15th of June 1970, lasting for 9.5 months. It was the longest ever American murder trial. The jury of 7 men and 5 women were kept in a hotel supervised by bailiffs for the entire trial, 225 days longer than any other jury before. There were vast amounts of evidence and information to collect, and a mass of witnesses to find. It also took an age to build a defense team, as Manson wanted to represent himself. His request was refused, but he rejected many of the attorneys appointed for him. He'd learnt enough in prison to know all of the ways to win time by delaying tactics. Manson was also desperate to control the defense. He did not want the girls' attorneys doing their proper jobs representing their clients' interests individually. The whole team was there to defend Manson, and the girls could take the rap. Manson would eventually be defended by Irving Kanarek. Although Manson did not choose him, he was the ideal attorney to the man who wanted to win time. Kanarek was notorious for his obstructionist behaviour and had once stretched a simple theft case into 2 years' worth of court time. Manson challenged the right for the first judge, William Keene, to preside over the trial, and he was replaced by Judge Charles Alder. For the people, the prosecution team was led by Vincent Bugliosi, supported by Aaron Stovitz. From the start, the trial was characterized by bizarre scenes and unprecedented behavior both in and outside the courtroom. On day 1, the 24th of July, Manson appeared with a cross on his forehead, which he had inflicted on himself with a hacksaw blade. He said nothing, but issued a typewriter statement, "I have X'd myself from your society." A few days later, his co-defendants were sporting the same mark, and by the end of the week, devoted family girls encamped on a corner near the courthouse had done exactly the same. When Manson later shaved his head, so did all of the girls. When he was obstructive in the court, turning his back on the judge, they also did this. At one point, Manson leapt from the dock towards the judge, screaming that he would have his head cut off. In August, the newly elected president Richard Nixon, who should have known better as he was himself an attorney once, endangered the legality of the trial by declaring that Manson was guilty and allowing this to appear in the press. Bugliosi had to present the prosecution case in an eerie atmosphere of death threats and anonymous phone calls from the zealous family members who wanted their friends freed. The judge and the attorneys had to be protected by bodyguards and were issued with walkie-talkies for communication in case their phones were cut off. Bugliosi's star prosecution witness was Linda Kasabian, who had actually been present at the Tate killings and had heard about the LaBiancas. Susan Atkins had also promised to testify, but retracted. Linda, who had said to Manson, "I'm not like you, Charlie, I can't kill anyone," seemed to have no fear for telling all she knew. She had to be kept in solitary confinement during her time at court, as there were fears that there would be attempts made on her life. Probably the most damaging witness was Tex Watson, finally extracted from the Texas jailhouse where he had first been arrested. Manson had been trying desperately to establish him as the evil mastermind of the killings, but when the jury saw All-American Tex, they could not believe it. What he said was more damaging. "Charlie called me over behind a car. He said for me to take the gun and the knife and go up to where Terry Moucher used to live. He said to kill everyone in the house as gruesome as I could." At last, on the 15th of January 1971, the jury went out, 7 months to the day since the beginning of the trial. They took 10 days to come to a decision, announcing a verdict of guilty on all counts on the 25th of January 1971. At the time, California law demanded 2 trials, one for guilt to be established and a second for the sentence to be decided. In the second trial, fraught with further courtroom antics, Vincent Bugliosi asked for the death sentence. On the 19th of April 1971, Manson, Atkins, Krenwinkel and Van Houten had the death sentence passed on them. They were not to die, however, because on the 16th of February 1972, California revoked the death sentence. The 4 of them were saved by the very society they planned to destroy. After the Manson trial, there were others. Tex Watson was finally brought to justice for the Tate LaBianca murders. Steve Grogan, Bruce Davis, Manson and Susan Atkins were brought into court for the murder of Gary Hinman and Shorty Shear. The death of Shorty Shear, ranch hand and out-of-work actor on the Spahn Ranch, has never properly been explained. He and Manson did not get on with each other, and after the police raid at the Spahn Ranch for stolen cars and credit cards in August 1969, Manson decided that it was Shia who had informed the police. Shortly after that raid, Shia disappeared and was never seen alive again. Based on the evidence given by the others, it was accepted that he was the 9th victim of the Manson family. Vincent Bugliosi, who had barely rested from the Manson trial, presided over the Tex Watson trial. The jury were again kept in a hotel and guarded by the bailiffs, but it was all over within 3 months. The jury found him guilty on the 12th of October, and he was sentenced to death on the 21st of October after only a few hours of deliberation. Susan Atkins was sentenced to death for her part in the Hinman murder. Bobby Busselil was already on death row. Manson, Bruce Davies and Steve Grogan were tried separately. Manson and Davies got life. Steve Grogan was given the death sentence, but Judge James Colts commuted it to life on the 23rd of December 1971, finding Grogan incapable of deciding anything on his own. It is by no means certain that the family death toll rests at 9. Various other deaths occurred throughout that period, from 1969 to 1972, most of which have never been solved. For instance, in a beach house on the 5th of November 1969, family member John Philip Hoyt, alias Zero, apparently shot himself. At the time, he was with other family members, Kathy Scher, Linda Baldwin, Sue Bartle, and Bruce Davies. They claimed he was playing Russian roulette, but the gun was fully loaded and had been wiped clean of fingerprints, even Zero's own. On the 16th of November 1969, the body of a young girl dumped in Laurel Canyon was identified as a family member. She had been stabbed 157 times. No one has ever identified her name. On the 21st of November, the bodies of 2 young Scientologists, James Sharp and Doreen Gould, were found in an alley in Los Angeles. Doreen Gould had been a girlfriend of Bruce Davies, himself an ex-Scientologist. Although the police suspected family involvement, nothing has ever been proved. On the 1st of November 1969, the body of Joel Pugh was found in the Talgarth Hotel in West London. His throat had been cut and there were razor slash marks on both wrists. The police put it down to suicide, and it was not until later that it was discovered that Joel Dean Pugh, ex-family member, was the former husband of Sandra Good. In November 1970, Leslie Van Houten's attorney Robert Hughes went away camping for the weekend and did not return. The trial had to be adjourned. His body was found in Sesper Creek, Ventura County, 4 months later. In total, Charles Manson was charged with 1 murder and a conspiracy to commit 7 others, though he claimed responsibility for up to 35. Charles Manson is unique among mass murderers. There have been many such killers in the United States, but none of them like Manson, for Manson murdered by proxy. The power of his personality made others want to do his killing for him, but how could this happen? Interviews with Manson himself and with people who knew him or followed him brought out very different pictures. To some, he was a racist, a misogynist, ill-educated and a bigot. To others, he was the most dangerous man alive, or even God or the devil. To himself, he was a small-time pimp and thief, and yet something in his personality allowed Manson to dominate and manipulate a larger group of people. There have been many studies of Manson, and his personality yields 2 overriding images. One is of the chameleon, the other is the dog. Manson frequently characterized himself as a mirror to humanity, a reflection of the sickness inherent in society of his time. Family members stated that he was a changeling. He could be whatever the other people wanted him to be. He could reflect their views. For example, in the conversation with Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecuting attorney, he could be rational and quick-witted, bringing out his prison lawyer skills. Yet Bugliosi could see the mesmerizing effect Manson had on Lynette Fromer and Sandra Good. Many people, including himself, described Manson as the man with 1,000 masks, ready to be whatever ingratiated him with the present company. For a physically small man, Manson was 5'2". He spent half of his life in prison. The ability to agree with all men is obviously a powerful survival strategy. When it was coupled with the mind control techniques of Scientology and fueled by a paranoid anger at the world, the result was a powerful persona. The image of Manson as a dog, and all that entails, was his favourite. He saw himself as a loyal friend, a rejected puppy, or a coyote pariah. At the same time, when he came across other dominant males, the biker gangs, Juan Flynn, who had survived Vietnam, Manson felt it was necessary to establish his position by boasting of the killings he had done. Like an unsocialized dog, Manson fed on the fear of others. People who showed fear were punished or assigned to lowly positions in the pack. People who could outstare or out-threaten, or showed they were not frightened, were left alone. Even his strategies were dog-like. In contrast to the communal values he talked about, there was no doubt that Manson had to be the leader of the pack, and everyone did what he said. Manson emerged in the 1960s when authority was being questioned on all levels, and young people were looking for an alternative way to live. He offered a way, and certainly inspired great love and loyalty in many of his followers. Even when Linda Kasabian was testifying against him, she still claimed that she loved him. Manson did not force people to kill for him. He made it possible for those with a mind to murder to allow themselves to do it.